Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and today I'm going to go over the recommended changes for the Adepta Sororitas because they're currently broken, and that doesn't feel good. They're way too powerful. They've had some very amazing changes with the post-patch updates. They completely reworked every unit. The sisters feel way better, but as you saw, I came in first for the tournament, and I wanted to prove that I was going to get to the #1 rank on the tournament without barely having to try. And that's in fact what happened because the sisters are broken. So I will go through and give my thoughts on the kind of changes that I'd recommend to make it a more balanced situation. Really, there's just a couple of bugs that are happening with the sisters, and if they really kind of changed a few of the mechanics, I think that would actually fix the whole faction and make it much more fair. But what happens now is there's just so many different buffs and the way they stack. One, it can cause things to bug out, and two, there was already known bugs with some of the abilities, and because they were never fixed, and then they added that ability to the Zephyrim, now they're bugged out, and it just makes them way too powerful. So with that, I'm going to continue to go through this faction and the units I'm recommending that we make changes to make it a more competitive faction. Now, those of you that have been watching my channel for quite some time will notice that some of these recommended changes have been voiced in the past, but people have been asking me to make it for each specific faction instead of having it in my recommended changes video where I just have pretty much random units and random factions all grouped together. So I'll try to make it specifically for each faction here. And then if you guys have thoughts, please comment below in the video, and who knows, maybe we'll luck out and somebody from Slytherin will see these videos and maybe they'll actually be willing to make some of these changes. Now, if you did want to report bugs or change recommendations, they do have a Discord channel, but I have not found that they've been super responsive to some of the changes and bugs that people have been reporting, so that's why I'm kind of putting it together in my video here. So with that kind of caveat here, we will get started. So the first recommended change that I would like is for them to fix the Honor the Martyrs, because this is currently bugged out. The mechanic itself is very fine, and it's actually kind of fun. How it works is if you have any unit, let's say you're on the map and you have your Canoness right here, any unit that's within a square that's touching the Canoness, when a unit that's within 5 squares of her gets wiped out, then the Canoness and any unit that's within one of those adjacent squares will get 10 momentum. So you can put guys into situations where you're like, okay, I know these sisters are going to get killed, my flamers are going to get killed, you know, fine, that sucks, but I'm willing to do that. Well, what you'd want to do if you know that's going to occur is you'd want to move units to be within 1 square of the Canoness, so then when they're killed, say if they're blowing up a Astra Militarum vehicle and you know they're going to suicide themselves, well, just put some guys next to her, and all of a sudden you've now given everybody within 1 square of her 10 momentum, which will then increase their evasion and get you closer to being able to use your empowered abilities. So great, that's fantastic. You can also buff it further by using the Divine Deliverance, where you can now get 20% momentum gains, and that will include with the Honor the Martyrs ability. All that is fine, no issue. What needs to happen though is whatever square the Canoness is on when she dies, that square will permanently then trigger Honor the Martyrs for the rest of the match. And so that means if you're playing on a map where you're now going to be really engaged into combat in a close quarters, say if you're doing a season control or a conquest map, and you're going to be leaving guys close to where the Canoness is dying, what experienced players will do is they'll bring units to then be within 1 square of where the Canoness died, and then as the units are getting picked off and they're continually having kills happening, they're continually triggering the Honor of the Martyrs ability, and they can get obscene amounts of momentum by doing that. And then when you start stacking it with Divine Inspiration, which gives you more momentum for every time you're attacked, if you want to convert your Shield of Faith stacks into Divine Inspiration, you can effectively get into situations where the sisters, one, can be incredibly hard to kill because they just have obscene amounts of evasion because of all the momentum they're gaining, and then two, they're effectively getting 2 attacks every few turns because they're generating so much momentum from the Honor the Martyrs bug. So please, please, please fix this. Otherwise, I like everything else you did with the Canoness. She's an absolute beast. She's one of the strongest HQ commanders in the game. As long as you kill her, it's fine. But because you're going to want to snipe her down, and that'll happen early, you don't want this Honor the Martyrs bug to be triggered indefinitely. Now, the other thing I would like to see changed is I wish Divine Inspiration, and this could be a hot take, so if you guys disagree, please let me know. But what I would like to see is for Divine Inspiration to have a cooldown, and not for 1 turn. Maybe like 3 turns. Possibly 2, but I think probably 3. And maybe 2. I don't know. I could be convinced either way. But a cooldown of 1 turn is not good. Because what effectively is happening is, let's say, let's take into consideration the other units that's bugged right now, is the Zephyrim right here. They're getting all this evasion. They're getting multiple attacks. Every time they're getting attacked, they're getting a stack of Shield of Faith, so it's not uncommon for them to get attacked 3 times and not get wiped out. And then the following turn, they're getting 30 momentum because they're going to have 3 stacks of Shield of Faith that they can now convert. And now that's going to make these guys even harder to hit because now they have all that extra evasion because of the momentum. And then they can even get empowered and then get double attacks. It just leads to some very broken play, and it also makes it way, way too easy for the sisters to now get to surge and empower their abilities. It's just too much of a momentum generator originally, and I think if you turned it to a cooldown, it would force players to take advantage of both things, right? Because if you keep it at a 2-turn situation, then that will okay, I think it should be 2 turns. Let's settle it on 2 turns. Originally I was thinking 3, but if you do 2, then you have the Shield of Faith mechanic. It starts to expire after 2 turns, and then you can do this. And that way it'll force players to also have access to the increased armor situation. And then they have to make a decision. Do I want to wait another round of turns to try to get this maxed out, to use the Divine Inspiration to get the 30 momentum the following turn, or do I want to just keep converting it now and then knowing I'll have 2 turns for it to convert over? I think that would be better. I think the other thing you could consider is maybe you need to decrease the amount of momentum you're getting per stack. I think maybe tweaking that down to be a little bit less may be more balanced as well, because 10 is a lot of momentum. I mean, other factions can struggle to get 10 momentums by just getting squad wipes on certain units, whereas you're just effectively getting it for free every turn, assuming you're attacked at least once, and you can get up to 30 if you've been attacked 3 times. So I think, adding this to a cooldown, potentially changing and decreasing the amount of momentum you're getting per stack, I think that would make for a much more balanced play. But currently, using that every turn is just too overpowered. More experienced Adepta Sororitas players have really showed me that using this every turn is the best way to go. Before, I'd be like, oh, the armor's better, and then converting it. No. If you can convert it every turn, that's what you want to do, because having a miss and you getting no damage is way better than a slightly reduced damage that you're taking to a unit. So please nerf the Divine Inspiration, because it's really, really powerful. And then if you empowered that, you'd effectively get 12 momentum per stack, and then it also gives you area of effect momentum buff to everything that's around you, which is fine. But again, I think the amount needs to be reduced. So I think if they nerf this ability a little bit, that would lead to better dynamic play styles. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are, but I think that has to happen. And then, since we're kind of just, I'll go over the things I think are most important that get changed right away. I'll just jump right to the Zephyrim and Seraphim. Is they need to fix the Grace bug. This has been known effectively since the units have been released on the first DLC release, but it wasn't as big of an issue with the Seraphim here, because yes, the Infernal Pistols would allow them to have a zone of control, but it was just against the unit that they were fighting, and the Seraphim, even with the Grace ability, were still pretty easy to kill, because you'd have Flamers. Even with that, they have 15 evasion to start with. That wasn't so overwhelming. And then they also didn't have a melee attack that they'd be locking everybody down into combat with. stuff where the Zephyrim do. And then when you start taking into consideration that they have 10 more evasion, now if this bugs out, that means you're already starting with a unit that has 25 evasion for the rest of the game after they've activated the Seraphim wings. And then done some sort of action. It seems like if you just use the jetpack, the grace will not work, but if it's something about when you activate Seraphim wings and then you do an attack, that seems to make the grace ability just stick around for at least 2 turns, and because your jetpack goes off a cooldown every 2 turns, that means you're effectively getting the grace ability for the rest of the match, and that doesn't feel great. So please, please, please fix the grace ability so this is not bugged out anymore, because giving these guys 25 evasion plus, you know, another 15 if you're using the Rhino smokescreen, plus the momentum they're getting because these ladies are going to be killing people with their power swords. You know, it's not uncommon for these to get 40 to 60 momentum every turn, especially when they keep spamming Divine Grace, because they're getting, you know, 20 to 30 momentum every turn by getting attacked multiple times, assuming they're not being killed. It just does not feel good. And since we're talking about not feeling good with these ladies, I think they need to be changed. At a minimum, you need to increase their cost up to 100, so they're the equivalent of an Infernal Pistol Seraphim, because I think that's their most equivalent option here, and that would make it much more balanced. If you're going to keep them at 15 evasion, I think you even need to probably increase their cost further than that. If you're going to drop the evasion, so it would be similar to the Seraphim, then I think keeping them at 100 would be reasonable. But if you're going to say, okay, we're going to have you have that 15 evasion to start with, then I think they probably should even have their cost increased to 110 with how powerful they are. But you have to fix this grace ability. I think it's fine to give them this super long, you know, charge distance with the Seraphim wings, getting past all those obstruction. I mean, that makes them feel like a very unique unit, but if you can fix these evasion bugs, that should make them much more enjoyable. And then I think if you have the Divine Inspiration nerfed as well, that would make these units be much more balanced, because right now effectively you're just our people are just making full jetpack armies, as you could see what I did in the tournament there, and like nobody could stand up to me. Now granted, some of those players were newer, but I think you just saw just throughout the matches how lopsided it was. I mean, I was tabling opponents on matches. I was effectively dominating almost the whole map on several matches, even on factions that are traditionally good at fighting the sisters. So please fix this. And then obviously the grace ability is also on the Seraphim, so fix that for them as well. So I think those are the changes that have to happen, and I'll kind of give my thoughts on the other things. One thing I'd like to see changed is I think the third command point ability, which gives you plus 15% attack and 1 armor piercing, I think that needs to be changed as well. So I think there's a couple of ways of doing that. Is one, you keep it at 1 command point, in which case I think you need to just drop the armor piercing buff that gives you, because effectively that makes your flamers become super overpowered, because you can get to 1 command point with the sisters very quickly, and by giving your Celestians a flamer that now has 3 armor piercing, or your Dominions 3 armor piercing, that's going to allow these guys to do enough damage where they're going to start being able to take out medium tier infantry, because that's the equivalent of your heavy flamers. And so turning every flamer into a heavy flamer, and your heavy flamers into, you know, 4 armor piercing units, that means they're going to start doing pretty significant damage to vehicles and heavy tier infantry. That just does not feel good. And in fact, I think you could even make an argument that if you're going to keep the bonus damage with 1 command point, maybe even that has to be nerfed to just a plus 10% damage instead of 15%, because of all the other damage buffs that you can potentially get. But having that ability be tier 1 command point, way too strong, and it just makes the sisters, there's no good counters. So effectively, I don't think the Necrons, other than with their Plasmamancer, can even fight the sisters in the way they are now, because with them being broken and then having flamers that could kill even the Necron front line, it just too lopsided. So you gotta nerf some of these things because they're just so powerful, especially if you start bringing, you know, the Canoness to give the battle sermon to give them additional range damage, and you start giving them, you know, increased accuracy and momentum. It just gets to be too overpowering. So I think you need to make changes to that as well. I think the other command point abilities are fine, and they feel good as a Adepta Sororitas player. I do think the other thing, since we're speaking about command point abilities, is please fix the command point bug. Whereas if you hover your command point ability on your HQ commander, that it just artificially increases the range by 1, because the effects don't go out to that increased range. So that was confusing me. I've had several new players get frustrated on matches because they're like, I thought, why did my command point ability not get applied to units? It's because if you hover over your HQ commander, and it'll artificially increase the range of your command point abilities, even though that's not actually the range that is going to be applied. So just fix that bug so that no longer happens. That actually happens on other factions as well, but it's most confusing with the Adepta Sororitas because you're trying to apply buffs to your units, and so that's not as big of an issue with other factions where you're not trying to buff up your units traditionally. You're trying to apply negative traits to your opponents or debuff them or something like that. But when you're trying to apply positive buffs to your own units and need to know where the squares are, you need to fix that, so that's not as much of an issue. So going back up to the top, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the Imagifier. I think she's an exceptionally good unit, and with everything else happening, she's actually probably a little too overpowered currently. I know that's going to piss off some people, but it really is true. So I think if you make the changes to some of these other abilities like we talked about, you could probably keep her the way she is. But if you're not gonna nerf, you know, the Divine Inspiration and fix the Graces bug and some of those other things, then you're gonna have to make changes to how she functions too. Because giving yourself, you know, the plus 15 momentum gains, which lasts for 2 turns, and then, you know, Tail of the Stoic to give you grace chances or the accuracy, it just makes her so overpowered. So what I'm going to recommend, assuming you're not going to do the other changes, is you just make each one of her tails just last for 1 turn, because it would effectively be her telling the tail of the units that are next to her, and then they fly off or go off and do combat, and then the following turn that would make her have to move around and then you know, use these other abilities. But what effectively people are doing is, you know, right before you're going to be in engagement, you know, you'll apply either the Tail of the Warrior to give you the plus 10 accuracy, Tail of the Stoic to give you 15% graze chance, or Tail of the Faithful, and then on the second turn when you are about to engage, you use your second tail, and then effectively you have a unit that's then going to have both of these abilities. And then with it only having a 2-turn cooldown, that means you're always going to have multiple options. So the third potential change is that you just change it to a 3-turn cooldown, and that would force your players to have to use one of these tails every turn to cycle through them, or you just do double attacks, obviously, if you didn't want to do that. But I think that would lead to more variability. Now, what I'm going to say, you know, these are just ideas for changes, and I don't necessarily think that they should enact all the changes that I recommend on these videos. Sometimes players are like, oh my god, you're going to wreck the frickin' faction if they make every one of these changes. Yes, that can be the case, but rarely is a game developer going to make all these changes at one time. So I'm just giving them ideas on different units that they could play around with, knowing that they're not going to make all these changes. So I just want to throw that out, because sometimes people get really pissed off, like, you're trying to wreck the faction. It's like, no, I'm just giving different ideas for different units for potential changes that they could do to make it a better experience. Now, going with that, speaking of people getting outraged, when the Arcoflagellants were originally released, they were incredibly difficult to kill, and people were getting super pissed off with them because they were hitting way above their pay grade for their costs. And because of that, it was decided that the rites of intercession should not apply to the Arcoflagellants. I think that should be rescinded. I think you should definitely be able to give 2 action points to your Arcoflagellants here and give them some bonus HP to make them a little more tanky, to be able to hit take some hits from some flamers and things like that, so they continue to be your bullet sponges here. So I think they should actually retract that change, and the Rites of Intercession should be able to be applied to the Arcoflagellants. So I'd like to see that happen. Otherwise, I think the Arcoflagellants are in a pretty good spot right now, and I like the changes that they did with their abilities, but I do think the Hospitaller should be able to buff them. Other things, speaking of bugged abilities, is the Castigator. What I've found is the Blessed Onslaught occasionally bugs out, especially if you're only selecting 2 targets instead of the 3. It seems like if you select all 3 targets, then it seems to go off without an issue. But if you're trying to get it to activate while only attacking 2 units, which is sometimes what happens because you have to select units that are somewhat close to each other, and there may not be 3 targets that are within the attack vicinity, that this will then not activate, and then you'll use the ability and it'll just fire on 1 unit, and then you're like, well shit, I just wasted my attacks for no reason here, for just a minor buff. So that needs to be fixed, and I found that that actually happens on other abilities where you have to manually select multiple targets, that if there's not multiple targets to be selected, you can't use the ability. Say the Tau missile strike ability. Well, let's say there's only 1 unit that you can attack in that area, but you have to drop 2 missiles. Well, it won't let you drop 2 missiles on the same unit, and therefore it just doesn't go off appropriately. So you got to fix these abilities that allow for potentially multiple targets for you to be like, oh, you're going to activate this even though you're not going to get the maximum amount of attacks. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And then you say yes. So you have to build in like a verification so people aren't accidentally activating it prematurely, and that they have to purposely select it to go off even though they're not getting the most bang for their buck. But currently what's happening is it's not going off appropriately, and then you feel bad because you're like, well, if that was the case, I would have just used, 2 regular attacks. So please fix the Blessed Onslaught here. Now, I'm not totally sure about this one, and I'd be curious to know what people's thought processes are. But I have very mixed feelings about the Twin Heavy Bolter here. So this is a very powerful Heavy Bolter. It's different from your other Heavy Bolters because you get additional attack, so it's like a more powerful version of the Heavy Bolter. And because of that, you have a 3-turn cooldown on the ability. Do you guys want it to stay that way, or do you think it should be the same as every other Heavy Bolter where you're then having a 2-turn cooldown allowing you to do more attacks more frequently, or do you like to have a more powerful attack that's happening every 3 turns? What are your thoughts? Because for me personally, I would prefer it to just to be the same as every other Heavy Bolter, and it just be on the 2-turn cooldown cycle instead of the 10 additional attacks every 3 turns. I don't feel strongly about it, but I kind of feel that I kind of have a preference that it should be a Heavy Bolter like everything else, but again, I don't feel strongly. You could keep it the way it is, but that's my thought, is maybe turn it into a Heavy Bolter like everything else so there's just consistency, because I'm just worried that maybe newer players that see all these other Heavy Bolters, on the Immolator, on the Exorcist, they may not appreciate that it's a little bit different for the Castigator tank, and that could lead to some confusion. And again, with it being a 3-turn cooldown and the fact that you're probably not going to use it until turn 3 by the time you start to get into engagement, that means you're only going to get it to go off maybe twice per match, where you could get it off 3 to 4 times if you're doing a 10-turn match, if it had a 2-turn cooldown instead of a 3. So that's my thoughts there. Like I said, that one I'm indifferent to, but that was my original thoughts. For the Hospitaller here, I kind of already told you my thoughts. I wish the Rites of Intercession would change, but the other thing I would like to see is for you to be able to give her the plasma pistol like you can for the Sister Superior or the Canoness, and that way she has some ability to defend herself, and you're not you can't spam her abilities. This has a 3-turn cooldown, this has a 3-turn cooldown, and so you can only use one of her command points to heal per turn, so therefore you're either going to be stuck using her bolt bolt pistol or just arbitrarily running her back and forth to waste that action point, because the bolt pistol itself isn't going to be able to do damage to most units. So I think if you just had a few extra spare points, if you gave her the plasma pistol, that would make her able to defend herself. Now you can make it a little bit of a weaker version, like you do with the Astra Militarum units, or you just, you know, make it maybe cost a little bit extra, 20 points instead of 15, or you just make it 15 and you just say, okay, now you've got this plasma pistol here, and have her attack twice. I mean, there's ways to nerf it, or you just make it, you know, just say, nope, it's going to be 15 points, and if they want to risk getting their hospital killed to get a powerful plasma pistol attack, you just make that the way it is. I think either option would be totally fine, but I'd like to see that changed as well. Other thoughts that I had is just a game mechanic that I think is kind of stupid, that I think should be changed. Is what is happening is if you are firing through one of your own vehicles, so let's say you have your Immolator, Rhino, something like that here, and you have a Dominion or a Celestian behind it with a flamer, you can flame through your vehicle, damaging your vehicle and attacking the unit that's in front of the vehicle, because that's only considered partial cover for that penalty. Whereas your opponent, if they want to counter flame you behind the vehicle, that counts as full cover. So I think it's kind of weird that you can flame through your vehicle. I suppose combat wise you could say, well, they're leaning around the vehicle and they're flaming around it. Fine, I guess, but it definitely feels kind of weird that that there's that inconsistency there, that your guys are hiding behind the vehicle and can't flame, that your units can flame through the vehicle, but your opponent can't flame through the vehicle to counterattack you. So I kind of feel like that's a little bit awkward, especially because attacks don't take movement, or don't cause movement penalties in this game. I think you should have to move around the vehicle to be able to flame and attack guys. Even if you, because if you want to still flame the vehicle to get some of the momentum and get some of the Blessed Hull stacks, and you just attack at an angle, it just feels kind of weird that you're able to cheese it that way by flaming through the vehicle itself. Now, this is a bug that I've noticed that can actually happen to any faction, but I find that it most frequently happens to the Adepta Sororitas because they have so many different buffs that give you temporary HP. You know, you have the Litany of Devotion, you have the Rites of Intercession. Wasn't there something here? What else was there? I thought there were some more that gave you temporary HP. But anyways, those are examples. Just, oh yeah, and then, you know, the Oath of Protection gives you bonus HP. So again, there's lots of abilities that give you bonus HP with the sisters. What can happen though is, let's say you're gonna give the bonus HP to the Sister Superior. If she's at the 180 points, then all these temporary HPs will stack on themselves, and it'll go from 180 points and stack up to there. But what can happen is, if you were meaning to heal the Sister Superior, so let's say she has, you know, 50 points of damage, so she has 130 HP. Well, what can happen is, if you don't heal her to get her up to the 180 HP first, if you give her the temporary HP, and let's say that gets her up to 160, then you heal, she'll cap out at 180, and so it won't take you to your base HP to 180 and then push that temporary HP to be above her HP amounts. The game gets confused. So please make it so you can put that temporary HP and then heal, and then it'll just push the temporary HP to be above the max HP. But right now the game gets very confused with how that works, and this can happen with any faction that has bonus HP or temporary HP, and then that you're not healed back up to full amount, because clearly the game is okay with you going above your max HP with the temporary HP. But again, if you just either need to be very cognizant that you need to heal or repair first and then apply the bonus HP, but that can lead to some weird positioning shenanigans that can be very frustrating as a player. So I'd just like to see them fix that bug where no matter what, you can heal back up to your maximum base amount, and then it'll push the bonus HP to be above that. So right now it's coded where the game gets confused. So I hope that that will get fixed as well. But I'll just mention it under this faction here, because I find it to be the most likely faction for that to happen, since you have so many different abilities that give you the bonus HP. My final unit that I'd like to see changed is the Retributors. And I'm not quite sure the best way to fix these ladies here, but with how they are currently, they just don't feel like they're in a good spot. You know, the bolters for 110 points just don't do enough damage for them to pay for themselves, because you have so many better units for a cheaper cost. So again, if you raise the cost of some of these other units, then the Retributors may be more competitive. But where it is currently, they're just not in a good spot. So again, I don't know the best way to fix the Retributors, so maybe those of you that are more into these statistics and balancing, or are a big Retributor user, may have better thoughts. But my napkin math solution would be to decrease the accuracy fall off or increase the base accuracy to the heavy bolter so they land more of their attacks, so then the heavy bolter feels more overpowering. Especially if you're going to do a bolter build where you start buffing up the bolters, then you'll land more of those attacks and you'll get more damage to make it worthwhile for the 110 points, and then also make them really pop off once you start using their Bastion of Faith and the Storm of Retribution abilities. But currently for 110 points, it just doesn't feel like they're effective here. The Retributors with the Heavy Flamer, I mean, okay, you're spending 130 points for a Heavy Flamer. You have a Penitent Engine that has 125 points that has a Heavy Flamer, and Buzz Blades here to do more than what they can do. Now, the thing that makes you could argue that makes the Heavy Flamer really good with the Retributors is if you use the Cleansing Flame ability and the Command Point ability, you can now get them up to 4 armor piercing, and now you can start doing damage to vehicles with them. I guess that's where these guys can be very viable, as they can kill pretty much anything with those Heavy Flamers. But I find that for the most part they just tend to overkill units, so I'd rather just use those points to help other units. So I'm not sure the best way to do this is maybe, the increased cost, maybe it needs to be slightly decreased for the Heavy Flamer, but then you don't want to make them too cheap where you can just get those Heavy Flamers for free, because once you, or not for free, but you swing it too much where the Heavy Flamers are just too powerful. So I'm not sure the best way to do this, but currently it just doesn't feel great. But I think out of all the builds, the Heavy Flamer is the one that's most viable. And then for the multi-meltas, they do great amount of damage. You can buff them up to crit to potentially do even more damage. They get even more armor piercing once you start using their Strike of Faith ability. But what I'm finding is they just kind of cap out at their damage, especially when you're taking into consideration that the Celestians can now start to get bonus 50% damage stacks with their Melta-Guns, and then you're buffing up the damage, and these guys don't get bonus attacks. So yes, if you get all 5 of these ladies attacking with their multi-melta and you have your Strike of Faith set up, they will do astronomical amount of damage. But what's more likely to happen is you're going to suffer a couple of model losses by the time you get your Bastion of Faith stacks up, and so they're going to have reduced damage. And yes, you can get them up to 10 armor piercing damage, which is the most armor piercing I think you can get in the entire game. But I don't think you get bonus damage once you get super above your armor piercing, so I'm not sure what kind of benefit that's giving you by getting you up to 10 armor piercing. And then, you're getting all these accuracies, so yes, they'll land their attacks, but they're going to have suffered model losses. So I think for 130 points, I would rather just be able to bring, 1.5 Celestians here with the Melta-Guns that are going to be able to be more likely to survive and do better things than the Retributors are for 130 points. And now the Retributors used to have the crack grenade, which would then give you a viable damage option as they're starting to suffer model losses, and you still have this powerful anti-armor ability. But once they decided that nope, the Dominions are going to get the crack grenade and the Retributors aren't, all of a sudden it became a much less attractive option. So do you give the Retributors back their crack grenade, maybe? And then they have a more dynamic play style? Something needs to happen with the Retributors to make them better, because right now almost nobody uses them except for newer players, and then they immediately regret their decisions. So Retributors still need a rework. I'm not sure the best way to do it. Those are some options. So those are my thoughts. You guys probably have some better options, so let me know what you think, but I'm just not super happy with where the Retributors are currently. So with that, those are my thoughts for the Adepta Sororitas and changes that I think have to happen, including the bug fixes, and then some potential ideas to make them a little bit better. So what are your thoughts? Comment below. If you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.